He paid nearly $100,000 to give his little brother the wedding of a lifetime. Hired the most exclusive ballroom in Manhattan, bought the dress, booked the honeymoon suite, paid for every flower, every bottle of champagne, every diamond on that table. And they threw him out. Security grabbed him by the arm, in a room he paid for, at a party he funded, surrounded by people drinking his money, and walked him to the door like he was nobody. If you've ever been betrayed by the person you sacrificed everything for, stay until the end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the wedding, Kang Min-jae woke at 4:53 and lay still in the dark for 11 minutes. He did not check his phone. He did not reach for the glass of water on the nightstand. He simply stared at the ceiling of his penthouse on the 54th floor and listened to the city breathe below him. The low mechanical groan of garbage trucks on Lexington, a siren cutting east toward the hospital, the muffled percussion of a world that never actually stopped moving, no matter what day it was. He had trained himself years ago to begin every morning this way. 11 minutes of silence before the day reached in and grabbed him by the throat. Today, the silence felt different. He noticed it the way you notice a smell you cannot name, something faintly wrong, something sitting just outside the edge of what he could identify. He had felt it before, twice, maybe 3 times in his life. Once the night before his parents died. Once the morning he made his first real enemy in this city. And now, he pushed it down. He was good at that. Min-jae was 39 years old, and he had built, from absolutely nothing, with no safety net and no mercy from anyone, a legitimate empire that included 4 luxury hotel properties, a mid-sized shipping company operating across 3 continents, and an investment portfolio that 2 separate financial journalists had described in print as aggressively conservative and somehow always profitable. What those journalists did not write about, because they did not know, or because they were wise enough not to ask, was the other structure that ran beneath those legitimate foundations like a second skeleton. The network, the relationships, the kind of influence that did not appear on any balance sheet but that made certain problems disappear before they became problems, and made certain people very careful about the choices they made in rooms where Min-jae's name came up. He was not a violent man by temperament. He was precise. He was patient. He understood leverage the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not as a tool of cruelty, but as a fact of the body, something that existed whether you acknowledged it or not, and something that could either be used correctly or could destroy you through ignorance. His people feared him because he was almost never wrong, and because when he was wrong, he did not repeat the mistake. He rose at 5 and dressed without turning on the overhead light. Black slacks, white dress shirt, the charcoal jacket he had purchased specifically for today and had hung on the back of the closet door since Tuesday. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city for a long time, holding his coffee with both hands. Below him, Central Park was a dark rectangle carved into the grid of light. He had lived here for 6 years and he still found the view remarkable. Not beautiful exactly, more like convincing. Like an argument the city kept making about its own importance. Today was his brother's wedding day. He set the cup down and allowed himself briefly to feel it. Kang Hyun-woo was 29, 10 years younger. He had their mother's mouth and their father's stubborn set to his jaw, and absolutely none of either parent's capacity for silence. He talked constantly, through meals, through movies, through the rare evenings Min-jae managed to pull himself away from work long enough to sit in the same room with another human being. He laughed too loudly. He spent money carelessly on things that would not matter in 6 months. He had opinions about food that he expressed with a conviction better suited to international diplomacy. Min-jae had raised him. Not technically. There had been an aunt for the first 2 years after the accident, a stiff and exhausted woman in Flushing who fed them and kept the lights on and did not ask anything emotional of anyone, but practically, genuinely, in the way that counted. He had been 19 when their parents died and Hyun-woo had been 9. And Min-jae had looked at his brother's face that week and made a decision so simple and so total that it didn't even feel like a choice. He would take care of him. That was it. That was the whole architecture of everything that followed. He had built the empire partly for himself, yes. He was not going to pretend otherwise. He was not that sentimental. But the foundation of it, the original fuel, was Hyun-woo. The tuition. The apartment in Koreatown when Hyun-woo first moved to the city. The business seed money 3 years ago when Hyun-woo decided he wanted to try importing Korean skincare products to the American market. Min-jae had written the check without blinking and told him not to thank him, just don't lose it all. He hadn't lost it all. The business was modest but real. Hyun-woo was proud of it in a way that made Min-jae proud in return, which was one of the few emotions he could track clearly anymore. And then came Vanessa. Vanessa Whitfield had walked into Hyun-woo's life 14 months ago at a gallery opening in Chelsea that Min-jae had funded as part of a real estate development project. She was tall and composed with dark eyes that moved around a room like she was quietly calculating its worth. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She asked questions that made you feel like the most interesting person in the building. She had told Hyun-woo on their second date that her family had money but that she had walked away from it, that she couldn't stand the pretension, that she had chosen her own path, that she valued people over position. Hyun-woo had come to Min-jae's office 3 weeks later with that particular look he got, chin slightly elevated, something defensive already assembled behind his eyes, and said he was serious about this woman. Min-jae had asked the standard questions. How long have you known her? What does she do? What do you actually know about her family? Hyun-woo had answered all of them, and Min-jae had listened, and when Hyun-woo left, he had asked one of his people to run a quiet background on Vanessa Whitfield. Not an investigation, just the basic architecture. Who are the parents? Where's the money? What is the actual family situation? The report came back 2 days later. The family was real. The Whitfield name carried genuine weight in certain East Coast social circles. Old money, not generationally ancient, but solidly established. The kind of comfortable that didn't need to announce itself. The estrangement story checked out on the surface. There had been a visible falling out roughly 4 years earlier. Some social media evidence, mutual unfollowing, the absence of family photos after a certain date. Nothing dramatic, nothing publicly documented, just the quiet withdrawal that rich families sometimes performed when they disagreed about something they considered private. Min-jae had filed the report in a drawer and told himself it was enough. That was the first mistake. The wedding venue was the Grande Meridian, a converted Gilded Age building on Park Avenue that had been a private bank in a previous life and now hosted approximately 40 events a year at rates that made people quietly reconsider their life choices. Min-jae had rented the primary ballroom and 2 adjoining reception rooms for the full day at a cost of $31,000, which did not include catering, florals, entertainment, photography, or the bridal party accommodations on the 8th floor. He arrived at 9 in the morning, 5 hours before the ceremony, because that was his nature. He needed to walk the space. He needed to see the setup and verify that everything that was supposed to happen had happened, and that the people he was paying understood that he noticed details. The venue coordinator was a thin, efficient woman named Patricia, who had coordinated events at the Grande Meridian for 11 years, and who therefore understood, better than almost anyone in her industry, the difference between a client who asked questions and a client who already knew the answers. She recognized Min-jae as the latter the moment he walked through the service entrance and began moving through the ballroom with his hands clasped behind his back. Everything looked correct. The floral arrangements, white orchids and pale green eucalyptus, Hyun-woo's request, were positioned exactly as specified. The round tables were dressed in ivory linen with crystal centerpieces that caught the morning light coming through the tall windows on the south wall. The bar setup along the east wall was being stocked by 2 young men in white shirts who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. Min-jae stopped at the head table and looked at the seating arrangement that had been printed and framed on a small easel near the entrance. He was at table 7. He stood with that information for a moment. Table 7 was a guest table. A good guest table, well-positioned, nothing insulting about the location, but a guest table, not the family table, not next to the couple or the bridal party. A guest table with people he didn't know, placed there by someone who had organized this seating chart. He picked up the seating card with his name on it. Kang Min-jae. Clean lettering. Correct spelling. He set it back down without expression and continued his walkthrough. Patricia appeared at his shoulder and began explaining the catering timeline. He listened. He asked 2 questions about the kitchen setup and 1 about the sound system. He did not mention the seating chart. He had learned decades ago that the most useful information came from pretending you had not yet seen what you had already seen. The ceremony itself was held in the smaller adjoining room that had been dressed with a white draped arch and rows of chairs tied with ivory ribbon. 212 guests. Min-jae counted by habit. He sat in the third row and watched his brother walk to the front of the room with the slightly dazed expression of a man who had arrived at a thing he had wanted so badly that the reality of it had not yet fully connected to his body. Hyun-woo was wearing the suit Min-jae had paid for, a dark navy Italian cut that made him look older and more serious than usual, which was the goal. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way, the kind of face that made people trust him quickly, and Min-jae watched him and felt something complicated move through his chest. Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle in the dress. The dress had cost $14,000. Min-jae had written that check directly to the designer's studio in Midtown after Vanessa's mother, a woman named Constance Whitfield, who supposedly had been estranged from her daughter, but who had somehow known the exact designer and the exact silhouette, had mentioned to Hyun-woo that Vanessa had always dreamed of a specific gown. Hyun-woo had relayed this to Min-jae with an apologetic shrug. Min-jae had paid it without discussion. Vanessa looked extraordinary in it. That was simply true. She moved with the precision of someone who had been trained to enter rooms, and the dress fell around her like it had been built for no other purpose. She was beautiful, and she knew it, and she wore that knowledge the way certain people wore expensive watches. Not to show it to you exactly, but in a way that expected you to notice. She walked to her groom, and Min-jae watched her face. She was smiling. The smile was perfect. It was the right size and the right warmth, and it reached her eyes at exactly the correct moment. And Min-jae, who had spent 20 years reading people in rooms where misreading a face could cost you everything, watched that smile and felt the thing from this morning return. The something wrong. He could not locate it. It was just a frequency, just a vibration below what he could articulate. He filed it and watched and said nothing. The vows were exchanged. The room applauded. Hyun-woo kissed his bride with an earnestness that was almost painful to witness. And when he pulled back, he looked like a man who had just solved a problem that had been troubling him for years. Min-jae clapped with everyone else. The reception began at 2 o'clock, and by 2:15 Min-jae knew something was wrong, in a way he could now begin to name. He had positioned himself near the bar during the cocktail hour and watched the Whitfield family move through the space. There were 11 of them. Not the small, fractured group of estranged relatives you might expect from a family described as distant. 11 people, 3 generations, dressed in a way that communicated not just wealth, but comfort, inside wealth. The grandmother wore a strand of pearls that had not come from a department store. The 2 Whitfield uncles had the unhurried posture of men who had never once been rushed by anyone they needed to impress. Constance Whitfield herself moved through the room with a warmth that was calibrated precisely to whoever she was speaking to. Broad and generous with the wedding planner, curious and attentive with the photographer, and when she turned briefly in Min-jae's direction, briefly, just a flicker, something that closed. Not hostile, not dismissive, something more considered than either of those, like a door that had been shut and locked before he could see what was inside. He watched Constance cross to where Vanessa was standing with 2 bridesmaids and touch her daughter's arm and say something low, and Vanessa's eyes moved across the room. Not to him, not quite, but in his direction. And there was a beat, very short, and then Vanessa laughed at something one of the bridesmaids said and turned her back. Min-jae drank his water and processed this. He moved through the cocktail hour with the measured ease of a man who had attended 500 events he did not want to attend and knew how to inhabit a room without drawing energy from it. He spoke to 2 of Hyun-woo's friends from the skincare business, a couple who had met in Seoul and were visiting for the wedding, and a woman who worked with Vanessa at a nonprofit whose name he had already forgotten. He was polite. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. He kept the part of his brain that was doing the other work, cataloging, connecting, reviewing, behind his eyes where no one could see it. At 3:15, the guests were directed into the main ballroom. The ballroom was extraordinary. Min-jae could admit that without sentimentality. The crystal chandeliers threw light across the ivory dressed tables in a way that made the whole room look expensive in a second language, not in the obvious way of new money, but in the quiet, assured way of a space that had always been this beautiful and didn't need your approval. The floral arrangements he had approved added the right amount of softness. The string quartet in the corner was playing something slow and European. The bar along the east wall was fully operational. He found his seat at table 7. His table mates were a couple who were friends of Vanessa's from college. She worked in public relations. He was in finance, both pleasant enough in the practiced way of people who were good at social occasions. A woman who was apparently Vanessa's former supervisor at the nonprofit. An older Korean man who had worked with Hyun-woo's business partner and who Min-jae recognized slightly but did not know well. And 2 empty seats. He sat. He introduced himself. He poured water. He noticed that the head table, 20 feet from where he was sitting, held Hyun-woo and Vanessa flanked by their respective wedding parties. 8 people in total, plus Constance Whitfield and her husband, and what appeared to be Vanessa's paternal grandmother. There was a specific seat at the head table, slightly removed from the wedding party proper, but still clearly positioned as family, that had been occupied during the cocktail hour by one of the Whitfield uncles but was now empty. That seat was the right size for him. He did not say this out loud. He filled his water glass and looked at the room and breathed. The dinner service was immaculate, as it should have been, because he had paid for the catering package that included the executive chef and the full sommelier rotation and the warm bread service that cost $700 more than the standard option, because Hyun-woo had mentioned once, offhandedly, 2 years ago, that he loved really good bread at restaurants, and Min-jae had remembered that the way he remembered everything that mattered to the people he was responsible for. He ate. He participated in the table conversation enough to be present without being memorable. He watched. At 4:40, he excused himself to use the restroom and took a slightly longer route back through the corridor adjacent to the bridal suite. Not for any particular reason, just the habit of moving through a space and learning its geography. He heard voices through a partially open door. He would not have stopped. He was not the kind of man who gathered information by loitering in hallways. But he caught his own name, not Min-jae, not even his full name. A name. The ATM. He stopped. The voice was female. Not Vanessa. Older. Constance. Honestly, the whole thing is almost too easy. Hyun-woo just goes to the ATM and comes back with whatever we need. You would think a man who runs whatever it is he runs would be a little more... Another voice, a younger woman, laughing. He doesn't even ask questions anymore. Constance, the flowers alone. The flowers, the dress, the venue, all of it. And he sits there at table 7 like a good little... A pause. A beat. Something that was almost a laugh but landed differently. Hyun-woo was right. He has no one. He doesn't know what family feels like, so he pays for the performance of it. It's actually quite sad. Min-jae stood in the corridor. His heart rate had not changed. This was something he had noticed about himself over the years. His body was slow to register what his mind had already processed. He stood very still and breathed once and listened to the silence after the voices moved away from the door. He had no one. He walked back to table 7 and sat down and folded his napkin in his lap and looked at the room and thought about what he had just heard with the careful, impersonal attention he would have given to a problem in someone else's company. The ATM. He replayed every interaction with Constance Whitfield over the past 14 months. The phone calls he hadn't been on but Hyun-woo had relayed. The check requests that always came through his brother, never directly, always through Hyun-woo, always framed as something Vanessa wanted, always with that particular apologetic shrug that Min-jae had interpreted as embarrassment, but now understood was something different. The report in his drawer. The estrangement story that checked out on the surface. On the surface, he had stopped there. He had run a basic check and accepted what the surface showed him and filed it away because Hyun-woo was happy, and Min-jae had told himself that was enough. That was what it meant to let someone live their own life, that his brother was an adult who could evaluate a woman for himself. He looked at the head table. Hyun-woo was laughing at something Vanessa had said, his hand resting on the back of her chair, his face open and genuine and completely unguarded in a way that Min-jae recognized from childhood, from the weeks after their parents died when Hyun-woo had still not understood fully what had happened and would sometimes laugh at the television with that same complete surrender to the moment. No defenses, no awareness of what was waiting. The dinner plates were cleared. The speeches began. Hyunwoo's best man gave a speech that was funny and warm and landed well with the room. Vanessa's maid of honor gave a speech that made several women at the surrounding tables reach for their napkins. Constance Whitfield stood and gave a speech about her daughter that was gracious and composed, and included a single sentence about how grateful she was that Vanessa had found someone who appreciated her. The kind of sentence that meant several things depending on where you were sitting. And then the MC announced that there was one final speech from a member of the Whitfield family, and a woman Min Jae did not recognize, mid-40s, Vanessa's aunt, it emerged, took the microphone. She began warmly. She talked about Vanessa as a child. She told a story about a family vacation that made the room laugh. And then she shifted, and the shift was subtle enough that if you weren't watching carefully, you might have thought it was still part of the same sentiment. "We want to welcome Hyunwoo into our family completely," she said. "We truly do. And we hope that everyone here tonight feels welcome, truly welcome," as opposed to a pause, a smile that did not involve her eyes. Well, as opposed to feeling that a check can purchase what can only be given freely. The room did not immediately understand, but some of the people closer to the head table shifted. One of the wedding party women glanced toward someone, with an expression that was not quite surprise, more like confirmation of something already known. Min Jae understood. He was sitting very still at table 7 with his hands flat on the table and his face entirely neutral, and the thing that had been building in him since 5 in the morning, the frequency, the vibration, the unnamed wrongness, had finally clarified into something with edges. The aunt continued speaking. She said something about the importance of authenticity in family relationships. She said something about how real love could not be bought, or arranged, or orchestrated. She smiled throughout. The smile was very clean. The room was beginning to understand what was happening, not fully, not all at once, but in the way that crowds gradually register an accident, the information arriving before the comprehension. And then she said, "We particularly want to acknowledge that some guests tonight may have come with the expectation that generosity entitles them to belonging, that paying for a celebration makes you part of one. To those guests," the briefest pause, just long enough for her eyes to move across the room and land, once, precisely, on table 7. "We wish you a lovely evening." There was a silence of approximately 4 seconds. Then someone at a table near the bar started a polite, uncertain applause that spread through the room unevenly, the way applause does when people are clapping because they are not sure what else to do. Min Jae did not move. He was still sitting with his hands flat on the table and his face showing nothing, and he was looking at Hyunwoo across the room, and Hyunwoo was looking at his champagne glass and not at his brother. And that more than the speech, more than a TM, more than the seating chart, that was the thing that settled it. His brother had known. 2 minutes later, a man in a black suit with an earpiece appeared at his shoulder. "Security." One of the venues. He leaned down and said quietly that he had been asked to let Mr. Kang know that the remaining portion of the evening was intended to be a private family celebration and that arrangements had been made for his car to be brought around. The table had gone very still. Min Jae looked at the security man for a moment. Then he folded his napkin. He set it on the table with the precise care of someone placing something down that they intend to pick back up. He stood. He walked with complete composure through the length of the ballroom. 200 guests in a room he had rented, drinking champagne he had purchased, sitting in chairs covered with linens he had paid for. And he walked out of the double doors at the rear of the room, and he did not look back. In the corridor, he stopped. He took out his phone. He called Yoon Seo-rin. Yoon Seo-rin had been Min Jae's attorney for 7 years. She was 42, had graduated from Columbia Law 3rd in her class, and had the specific quality of being someone who understood immediately when a call was not a call, but a deployment. She answered on the second ring. "Where are you?" he said. "Home." "What happened?" He told her. Not the emotional version, the factual version, venue, contract holder, payment records, itemized costs. He spoke for 4 minutes without stopping. When he finished, there was a brief silence. "Every contract is in your name," she said. "Confirm it." "I drew them up myself. The venue, catering, florals, photography, entertainment, honeymoon suite. All of them. Every check came from your business account. Legally, the celebration is yours to terminate." He stood in the corridor and looked at the door to the ballroom. "How long do you need?" he said. "To review them? I have digital copies. Give me 20 minutes. "You have 10. He put the phone in his pocket and walked back toward the ballroom doors and stood outside them and listened to the music and the voices and the sound of his money being spent by people who found him sad. Seorin called back in 8 minutes. "Every contract is clean," she said. "You are the named party on all of them. Legally, the services were contracted by and for you. You have the right to terminate." "What about the guests?" "Invited to your event, your venue, your food and drink. There is no legal obligation to the guests of an event you are terminating." "And the vendors?" "All have termination clauses, standard. You'll forfeit the deposits, which you've already paid, but the active services can be stopped." Min-jae absorbed this. "Are you sure about what you want to do?" Seorin said. She was not a sentimental person, but she asked the question without condescension. He thought about Hyun-woo looking at his champagne glass. He thought about the aunt's smile moving across the room to table 7. He thought about ATM spoken in the warm corridor of the Grande Meridian with 200 people 20 feet away eating the food he had bought them. "Send me the venue manager's personal number," he said, "and then get to the office. I need you available." He put the phone away. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the ballroom doors. He had not been angry like this in years. Not the hot, uncontrolled kind that young men felt before they learned better. The specific cold anger of someone who has been precisely, deliberately, and successfully deceived by a person they chose to trust. He pushed open the ballroom doors. He walked to the stage where the MC was standing near the podium, reviewing something on a clipboard. The MC looked up and started to say something, and Min-jae took the microphone from the stand without breaking stride, and the MC took one look at his face and stepped back. The string quartet trailed off. 200 heads turned. Min-jae stood at the podium in the charcoal jacket he had bought for this specific day and looked at the room for a moment without speaking, and the silence spread from the stage outward like something dropped in water. He found his brother's face at the head table. Hyun-woo was looking at him now. Finally. And his face had gone the color of old chalk. Min-jae brought the microphone up and spoke clearly into the quiet room. "My name is Kang Min-jae," he said. "I am the one who paid for tonight." He paused to let that land. "The venue you are sitting in, the food you have eaten, the wine you are drinking, the flowers on your tables, the music you were listening to, the dress the bride is wearing, the honeymoon suite reserved upstairs, all of it, paid for by me." He looked at Constance Whitfield. She had not moved, but something in her posture had changed. A tiny recalibration, a slight tightening of what had been so carefully relaxed all evening. "I am told," he continued, "that generosity does not entitle a person to belonging. I was told this tonight, in this room, with my money in everyone's glasses." He paused. "I agree. Generosity does not buy belonging. You're right about that." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. He made one call, held for 3 seconds, spoke 2 sentences, and put it away. "I've just instructed the venue manager to end the celebration effective immediately. The bar is closing. The music is done. The kitchen will not be serving the cake. The honeymoon suite reservation will be canceled in," he checked his watch, "approximately 4 minutes." The room was absolutely silent. "The remaining catering will be donated to a shelter in Harlem. I've already made the arrangements." He set the microphone back on its stand with the same precision with which he had folded his napkin 40 minutes ago. He looked at Hyun-woo one more time, at his brother's face, white and still, and finally paying attention. And then he turned and walked back toward the door. Behind him, the room erupted. He did not turn around. He was in the elevator when his phone began to ring. Hyun-woo. He watched the name pulse on the screen for the full duration of the elevator's descent, 12 floors, 40 seconds, and did not answer. In the lobby, he walked past the front desk without stopping, through the revolving door, and out onto Park Avenue where the evening air hit him like cold water, and taxis moved past, and the city continued doing what it always did, which was not care about any particular person's particular problem. His car was waiting. He got in. His driver, a quiet man named Thomas, who had been with him for 4 years and understood that silence was sometimes the only appropriate response to what he witnessed, pulled away from the curb without being asked. Min-jae sat in the back and watched the city slide past the window, and held the cold anger very carefully. The way you hold something that you know is going to be useful later. The way you hold a piece of evidence that is about to become the foundation of something significant. He knew, with the certainty of someone who had learned to trust his own instincts in the years when his instincts were the only reliable thing he had, that tonight was not the end of this. It was the beginning. What he did not know yet, what was waiting for him in the morning, in the report his investigator would assemble over the next 72 hours, was that the deception was larger than he had understood, more deliberate, more complete, and that the person most central to it, the person whose betrayal would hit him in a place where he had long believed himself unreachable, was not Vanessa Whitfield. It was the boy he had spent 20 years building an empire to protect. The penthouse was dark when Min Jae got home. He did not turn on the lights. He crossed to the window and stood in the same position he had occupied at 5 that morning. Same glass, same city below, same rectangle of park carved into the grid, and the symmetry of it was not lost on him. He had started the day here, and he had ended it here, and in between something had been broken that he was still in the process of fully measuring. His phone had received 41 messages in the car. He had read none of them. He set it face down on the kitchen counter and poured 2 fingers of bourbon from the bottle he kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one he rarely touched, because he did not drink when he needed to think clearly, and he almost always needed to think clearly. Tonight, he made an exception. He drank it standing at the counter and poured a second and carried that one to the window. The city below him was indifferent and enormous, and he was grateful for both of those things. He stood there for a long time. At 11:40, his phone vibrated with enough persistence that he finally crossed the room and looked at it. Most of the messages were from Hyun Woo. 12 of them, starting 20 minutes after he had left the Grande Meridian, and increasing in frequency and in something that started as anger and shifted, around message 8, into something that sounded more like panic. The last one, sent 9 minutes ago, said only, "We need to talk tonight, please." Min Jae read it. He set the phone back down. There were also 3 messages from Seo Ren, who did not waste words even in text. The first said, "Office ready when you are." The second, sent 90 minutes later. "You should know the venue manager called me. Whitfield family is threatening to dispute the termination. I told him to have their attorney contact me." The third, sent 20 minutes after that. They backed down. "Also, I started pulling the original vendor contracts for your review. There's something you need to see." He read that last one twice. He called her. She answered immediately. It was almost midnight, and she sounded completely alert, which was one of the things he relied on her for. "What did you find?" he said. "Not on the phone. Come in the morning, early." "Tell me what category." A pause. "The estrangement," she said. "I pulled some of the background work your investigator did 14 months ago. I think the question you asked him wasn't specific enough." He processed that. "How early?" "I'll be there at 6. He ended the call and stood in the dark with the bourbon and did not sleep for a long time. Well, Hyunwoo arrived at the penthouse at 7:15 the next morning. Min Jae had been back from Seorin's office for less than an hour. He had showered and changed and was standing at the kitchen counter with coffee when the building's front desk called up. He told them to send his brother up. Then he stood and waited and listened to the elevator, and when the door opened, he was ready. Hyunwoo looked terrible. That was the first thing. He had not slept. That was obvious. The skin under his eyes had the bruised, papery quality of a person who had been awake all night in a state of sustained distress. He was still in the clothes from the wedding, the navy suit now carrying the specific dishevelment of fabric that had been worn through the wrong kind of night. His tie was gone. The top button of his shirt was open. He was carrying nothing. He stepped into the apartment and Min Jae looked at him, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Hyunwoo said, "You destroyed my wedding." His voice was not what Min Jae expected. It was not apologetic or frightened. It was hard. The kind of hard that comes from a night of converting grief into something more manageable. Min Jae said nothing. 200 people, Hyung. 200 people watched you take a microphone and... He stopped, breathed. "Do you understand what you did? Do you have any idea what tonight was like for Vanessa? For her family?" "For her family," Min Jae said. "Yes, for her family. The family that was supposed to be estranged." A flicker. Something moved across Hyun-woo's face. Not guilt, not quite, but the first faint signal of something underneath the anger that knew it was standing on unstable ground. They reconciled, Hyun-woo said. Families work things out. It's not when. What? When did they reconcile? Give me a date. Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. I don't know an exact approximately. A month, a season, a year. Why does that matter right now? Because, Min-jae said, I spoke to my attorney this morning, and the question of when the Whitfield family reconciled turns out to be a more interesting question than I understood when I first looked into Vanessa 14 months ago. He picked up his coffee. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. Hyun-woo. The name came out flat and quiet and carried 20 years of weight. Hyun-woo sat. Min-jae remained standing. He set the coffee down and looked at his brother, at the tired, defensive, frightened face of the person he had organized his entire adult life around, and chose his next words with the care he usually reserved for rooms where the wrong sentence could end a business relationship permanently. Seorin found something, he said. When she pulled the background work from 14 months ago, she noticed that the investigator I used ran his check on Vanessa Whitfield as an individual. He verified her employment, her apartment, her financial situation. He found the social media evidence of the estrangement, and he stopped there because that was what I asked him to look for. He paused. He didn't run a check on the Whitfield family's activity during the same period. Specifically, he didn't look at the family's social calendar, their event attendance, their public appearances. Hyun-woo was very still. Seorin spent 2 hours this morning pulling publicly available records, society pages, charity gala photographs, a profile in a Connecticut lifestyle magazine from 18 months ago. Min-jae looked at him. The Whitfield family appeared together, publicly, as a unit, with Constance and Vanessa photographed together at a benefit dinner 11 months before you and Vanessa met at that gallery. The room was quiet. 11 months before, Min-jae said again, because he wanted it to sit in the room. Which means the estrangement story Vanessa told you, the story I was told, the story that made her seem like someone who had chosen integrity over inherited money, was not true 14 months ago when you met her. It was already over. Hyun-woo opened his mouth, closed it. And the gallery opening, Min-jae said, where you met. That event was funded through one of my real estate development subsidiaries. It was publicly listed in the event program. My name was on the program. He let that land. Hyun-woo's face had changed. The hard surface had developed a crack, thin but real, running through the manufactured anger from the night before. Hyun-woo, Min-jae said, I need you to tell me the truth, not the version you decided on last night while you were putting your anger together, the actual truth. Did you know? The silence that followed was 8 seconds long. Min-jae counted. It's not, Hyun-woo started, stopped. His hands were flat on his knees and he was looking at a point on the floor between his shoes. It wasn't like some conspiracy. It wasn't, did you know that her family wasn't actually estranged? A breath. Yes. The word was very small. It fell into the room and did not make much sound, but it changed the acoustics of everything. Min-jae stood with it. He breathed once. He had told himself in the car from Seorin's office that he was prepared for this. He had told himself it was a logical conclusion, that the evidence pointed here, that he had already processed the possibility. He had been wrong about how it would feel. How long have you known? He said. Since, Hyun-woo's voice broke slightly on the word and he stopped and rebuilt it. Since about 2 months after we started dating, she told me. She said it was a simplified version she told people because the real family situation was complicated and she didn't want to lead with all that. And you believed her. I loved her. That's not what I asked. Hyun-woo looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, which could have been from the sleepless night or from something else. I believed her because I wanted to, because she was... He stopped. Something moved through his face that was genuinely painful to look at. Because the alternative was to be the guy who suspects his girlfriend of everything, and I didn't want to be that. You're already that. You do that for both of us. I didn't want... Did you know she knew who I was before you met? The silence this time was longer. Hyun-woo. She said she'd seen my name in the program and thought it was interesting that you... Did her family know? His brother's eyes dropped back to the floor. Did her family specifically target you because of me? Nothing. Say it, Min-jae said. Not loud, not cruel, just flat and certain and requiring an answer. Hyun-woo's voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. Constance mentioned it once. She said it was fortunate that Vanessa had found someone whose family was in a position to... She said it was a good match. Practically. I told myself she just meant financially compatible, that it was just, you told yourself. Yes. Min-jae picked up his coffee and walked to the window and stood with his back to his brother for a moment. The city was doing its morning thing. Delivery trucks, a helicopter low over the park, the specific dense noise of 8 million people starting a Tuesday. He breathed. He thought about the 9-year-old sitting in a Flushing apartment, not yet understanding that both his parents were gone, and Min-jae beside him doing the math of what that meant in practical terms, in terms of what needed to happen next, in terms of who was going to do it. He had done it. He had done all of it. And Hyun-woo had sat in Constance Whitfield's living room and allowed himself to be told that his brother's money was a practical advantage and had chosen to continue. He turned around. "Get out," he said. Hyun-woo looked up sharply. "Min-jae, I'm not going to do this today. I'm not ready to have the conversation that comes after this one. Get out and don't come to this building until I call you." "You can't just..." "Hyun-woo." The name again. Same register, same weight. "I am telling you, clearly and calmly, that you need to leave this apartment. If you love me even slightly, you will do that right now." His brother stood. He stood with the specific unsteadiness of someone who had come into a room expecting one fight and found a different, much larger one waiting for him. He looked at Min-jae with an expression that had finally dropped all its armor. No anger left, no defensive posture, just the face underneath. "I'm sorry," Hyun-woo said. Min-jae said nothing. Hyun-woo walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and didn't turn around. I didn't think you'd be..." He stopped. "I didn't think..." "No," Min-jae said. "You didn't." The door closed. Min-jae stood in the silence for a long time. The coffee in his hand had gone cold. He set it down on the windowsill and looked at the city and breathed very carefully and deliberately, the way you breathe when you are maintaining something that will shatter if you stop paying attention to it. He was back at Seo-rin's office by 9. She had the contract spread across the conference table in chronological order, and she had been working since before 6, and there were 2 empty coffee cups near her elbow, and she looked at him when he came in and read his face and said nothing about what she saw there. Hyun-woo confirmed it, he said. She nodded once. She had expected this. That was one of the things about Seo-rin Bet. She did not perform surprise at conclusions she had already reached. "How much do we have?" he said. "Enough to make a case. Maybe enough for more than a case." She moved 2 documents to the center of the table. "I had my investigator start fresh last night. Not the original guy. Someone better. He worked through the night." She tapped the first document. "The Whitfield family is in significantly worse financial shape than their public profile suggests. The old money is not as old as it appears, and there have been 3 years of quiet asset liquidations. The Connecticut house is mortgaged. 2 of the business interests Constance's husband runs are being dissolved." Min-jae looked at the documents without touching them. "The estrangement narrative was curated," Seo-rin continued. "We found the benefit dinner photograph, the one from 18 months ago. We also found communications suggesting that Vanessa's initial introduction to your gallery event was not accidental. We don't have direct proof of that yet. But the timeline is very clean and very suspicious, and a good lawyer..." She paused. "You are sitting across from a good lawyer." Min-jae sat down. For the first time in 36 hours, he felt the weight of the previous day land in his body all at once. Not emotionally, just physically. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been running on controlled adrenaline and who has now, briefly, stopped moving. "What are we looking at?" he said. "Legally. Fraud is a high bar. Intent is hard to prove without communications. But we don't necessarily need criminal fraud." She folded her hands on the table. "The wedding expenditures were substantial and verifiably made under the assumption, induced by false statements, that this was a genuine family situation. The estrangement story was material to your willingness to spend. That's a civil claim. We could argue unjust enrichment, fraudulent misrepresentation, potentially more if the investigator finds what I think he might find regarding the gallery introduction. What's the settlement potential? Significant. The Whitfields can't afford a prolonged lawsuit, not with their actual financial picture. They'd settle to avoid discovery making their situation public. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the documents on the table without seeing them.
"There's something else," Seo-rin said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more precise. The way she got when she was delivering information she considered important enough to land correctly. "My investigator flagged something. When he dug into the timing of Vanessa and Hyun-woo's relationship, he found a prior connection we didn't know about." Min-jae looked up. Vanessa Whitfield and Hyun-woo's business partner, a man named Daniel Cho, attended the same graduate program at Columbia. 2 years ago, they overlapped for 1 semester. She slid a photograph across the table. They're in the same photograph at a Columbia alumni event, 14 months before the gallery opening, where Vanessa and Hyun-woo supposedly met by chance. Min-jae looked at this photograph. It was a party photograph, the low-quality, wide-angle kind that got posted to institutional social media accounts. There were perhaps 30 people in it. Vanessa Whitfield in the far left, Daniel Cho in the center, both clearly present, both clearly connected to the same institutional event. He set the photograph down. "Daniel Cho introduced them," he said. It was not a question. "We don't have confirmation yet, but the probability..." Daniel Cho introduced them and didn't tell Hyun-woo he knew her. He looked at the photograph again. "Or Hyun-woo knew." Seo-rin said nothing. She let him work through it. Min-jae stood. He walked to the window of the conference room, which faced east, away from the park, toward the dense mid-rise grid of Midtown. He stood there and processed the full geometry of what he was looking at. Not just the betrayal he had understood last night, not just the larger one his brother had confirmed this morning, but this new layer, this additional dimension that suggested the original point of contact had been engineered. A man he had indirectly funded, through Hyun-woo's business, through the seed money he had written without blinking, had potentially been part of the architecture that delivered his brother into this situation. "I want the investigator to confirm the introduction," he said. "He's already working on it." "How long?" 24 hours. Maybe less." He turned from the window. "When we have confirmation, I want to be in a room with Hyun-woo, with the photograph and whatever else we find. I want him to see all of it before I decide what comes next." Seo-rin nodded. "And Seo-rin," he looked at her, "whatever I decide comes next, I need it to be airtight, not aggressive, not retaliatory. Airtight. I want them to understand that what they built against me was constructed by people who did not know what they were building against." She held his gaze for a moment. "Understood." He picked up his jacket from the chair. He was almost at the door when she said his name. He turned. "The video," she said, "from the reception. It's been viewed 4 million times since last night. Multiple outlets are running it." He had known this was coming. He had known it in the car when he left the Grande Meridian, and he had filed it away as a problem for a later hour. "What's the angle?" he said. "Mixed. Some are calling you the villain. Others are calling you the victim. Social media is..." She paused. "It's loud." "It'll be louder when the fraud comes out." "Yes," she said. "It will." He left the office and stood in the elevator on the way down and looked at his own reflection in the polished metal doors. The charcoal jacket from yesterday. The face of a man who had not slept. The eyes of someone who was still in the process of deciding something enormous. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from a number he did not recognize. No name. 3 sentences. "Mr. Kang, I think you deserve to know the full story. I was there when they planned it." He stood in the elevator as the doors opened onto the building lobby, and people moved past him, and the city continued its enormous, indifferent motion, and he read the message 3 more times and understood that whatever shape he had believed this situation to have, it was larger than... He stood in the lobby for 11 seconds. Around him, the building moved, a courier dropping an envelope at the front desk, 2 women in business suits crossing toward the revolving door.
a security guard shifting his weight from one foot to the other with the practiced boredom of someone who had stood in the same spot for years. None of it registered. Min Jae stood with the phone in his hand and read the message a fourth time and then a fifth. And then he put the phone in his pocket and walked to the far corner of the lobby near the emergency stairwell door where the foot traffic didn't reach and took it out again. Mr. Kang, I think you deserve to know the full story. I was there when they planned it. No name, no context. A number with a New York area code that his phone did not recognize. He typed, "Who are you?" The response came in 40 seconds, fast enough that whoever it was had been watching the screen. "My name is Rachel Cho. Daniel is my brother. I need to meet with you today. Not by phone." Min Jae read this and stood very still for a moment and then typed, "Where?" She had chosen a diner in Murray Hill, the kind of place that had been in the same location for 30 years and had not updated anything about itself in that time. The same vinyl booths, the same laminated menus, the same particular smell of coffee that had been sitting on a warmer for too long. It was anonymous in the way that only genuinely unfashionable places could be. Nobody in Min Jae's world would eat here, which was probably why she had chosen it. Rachel Cho was already in a booth in the back when he arrived. She was in her mid-30s, slight, with the kind of face that did not immediately give you much to read. Not closed exactly, more composed, like someone who had spent time learning to manage what showed. She was wearing a dark green jacket and had a coffee in front of her that she had not touched. She looked up when he came in, and her eyes moved over him once, quickly, in a way that suggested she had been checking entrances since she sat down. He slid into the booth across from her. "You came alone," she said. "Yes? I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." He looked at her. "Talk." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the table for a moment. Not stalling, organizing. He recognized the difference. When she looked up, her voice was level. "Daniel is my older brother. We're close. We're close." She corrected the tense and the correction landed with weight. 8 months ago, he told me something he shouldn't have. I think he told me because he needed someone to know, and I was the only person he trusted. I didn't understand the full picture then. After last night, she stopped. I saw the video this morning like everyone else. I've been sitting on this since 8 a.m. trying to decide. Decide what? Whether telling you makes it better or worse. Tell me what you know, and I'll tell you which one it is. She nodded. She had expected this. She took a breath that was not quite steady. Daniel met Vanessa at Columbia 2 years ago. You probably already know that part. I found out this morning. What you don't know, what I don't think your people have found yet, is that the introduction at the gallery wasn't Daniel's idea. It was Constance Whitfield's. She met his eyes. Constance approached Daniel 6 months before the gallery opening. She had done research on Vanessa's social network from the Columbia period, and she identified Daniel as someone who might have access to people in your orbit. She knew who you were. She had been following your business profile for over a year. Min Jae said nothing. His hands were flat on the table, and his face was doing nothing. She told Daniel that Vanessa needed to meet someone stable, someone with real resources. She framed it as a mother wanting a good future for her daughter. Rachel's jaw tightened slightly. She also told him that if he could facilitate an introduction, and if things developed the way she expected them to, there would be a financial arrangement for Daniel. A referral, she called it. How much? $50,000, paid in 2 installments, 25 when Hyunwoo proposed, 25 on the wedding day. The diner noise continued around them. The scrape of a chair, the bell above the door, someone's phone playing a notification sound at the counter. Min Jae sat in the middle of all of it and felt something in his chest go very cold and very quiet, like a room whose window had just been opened in winter. Daniel arranged the gallery introduction, he said. Yes. He told me he felt uncomfortable about it, but the money was... His business had a bad year. He convinced himself it was harmless, that it was just an introduction, that Vanessa and Hyunwoo would either work or they wouldn't, and he was just... She stopped. He used the word facilitating, I remember, because it made me sick. Did Hyunwoo know Daniel had been paid? No. She said this immediately and with conviction. Daniel was very clear about that. Hyunwoo didn't know about the arrangement with Constance. He knew Daniel had introduced them, Obviously, he knew that, but he thought it was just a friend doing a friend a favor. Min-jae filed this. It did not exonerate his brother. It adjusted the geometry slightly. The second installment, he said, the $25,000 on the wedding day. Was it paid? Something moved across Rachel's face. That's the part I need you to understand. That's why I'm here. She set down the coffee cup. Daniel received the second payment 3 days ago via wire transfer from a Whitfield Family LLC. She reached into her jacket pocket and removed her phone and turned it to face him. On the screen was a photograph of a bank statement. Daniel Cho's name at the top. A wire transfer entry dated 3 days before the wedding, $25,000. Originating account listed as Whitfield Family Holdings LLC. Min-jae looked at the photograph for a long time. Daniel didn't know I'd seen this, Rachel said. I saw it by accident. He'd left his laptop open. She took the phone back. When I asked him about it, he told me everything. He cried. I've never seen my brother cry before in my adult life. Her voice stayed level, but it cost her something. He said he wanted to undo it. He said by the time he understood what he'd actually helped build, it was too late, and he didn't know how to... She stopped. He's not a bad person. He made a terrible decision for money, and he's been living with it. Where is he now? Home. He doesn't know I'm here. Min-jae leaned back in the booth. He looked at the table and breathed once, long and controlled. His mind was doing the restructuring work, taking the shape he had understood this morning and rebuilding it with the new dimensions Rachel had just provided. Constance Whitfield had not simply been a mother who approved of her daughter's opportunistic relationship. She had been the architect. She had identified him, researched him, located a point of access in Daniel Cho, and paid for a controlled introduction over a year before Hyun-woo and Vanessa met at that gallery. This was not opportunism. This was a plan. Does Vanessa know her mother engineered the introduction? He said. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Daniel thinks she might not know the full extent, but... She paused. But she knew the estrangement story wasn't true, and she used it. So whatever she knew or didn't know about the beginning, she was participating by the time it mattered. He nodded slowly. Mr. Kang. Rachel's voice shifted. It lost some of its composure. Not much, but enough. I'm telling you this because what happened to you last night wasn't random. You were selected. Your brother was the mechanism, but you were the target. The money, the wedding, all of it. It was a withdrawal from someone they spent over a year positioning themselves to access. She looked at him directly. You deserve to know that. Min-jae looked at her for a moment. Why didn't you come to me before the wedding? Because I only found the bank statement 4 days ago, and because... She stopped, started again. Because I was afraid. Daniel is my brother. I didn't want to be the person who... She exhaled. I made the wrong call. I know that. He said nothing. I'm sorry, she said. He slid out of the booth and stood and reached into his wallet and left $40 on the table for the coffee neither of them had drunk and looked at Rachel Cho one more time. Send me the photograph of the bank statement, he said. The number you texted from. She nodded. He walked out. He called Seorin from the sidewalk. I need you to run Whitfield Family Holdings LLC, he said. Full corporate structure, any transactions in the last 18 months, any connected accounts. A pause. That'll take a few hours. I also need you to pull everything on a wire transfer. $25,000, 3 days before the wedding, from that LLC to a personal account. I'm sending you the account details. Min-jae? Her voice was careful. What did you find? The gallery introduction was paid for, he said. Constance Whitfield paid Daniel Cho to introduce Vanessa to Hyun-woo. She identified me first. The marriage was the extraction mechanism. The silence on Seorin's end lasted 4 seconds. That changes the legal picture significantly, she said. I know. Fraudulent inducement, potentially conspiracy to defraud. The bank transfer is direct evidence of a financial arrangement connected to the scheme. If we can tie Constance to the original approach to Cho and establish that the false estrangement narrative was deployed as part of the scheme, we can tie her, he said. Get someone to Daniel Cho before he talks to anyone else. He's at home. His sister just left him and he doesn't know she came to me. Go now, before he has time to think.
Do you want him pressured? No, I want him offered protection. He's a witness, not a target. If he cooperates fully, his exposure is manageable. Make sure he understands that. Understood. He ended the call and stood on the Murray Hill sidewalk and looked at nothing for a moment. Then he pulled up his messages and typed to Hyun-woo, I need you at my office at 3. Come alone. The response was immediate. Okay. He put the phone in his pocket and hailed a cab because he did not want to sit in his own car right now, did not want the familiar interior and Thomas's careful silence. He wanted the anonymous back seat of a yellow cab and a driver who didn't know his name and a window he could look out of while the city moved past. And he held what he now knew and figured out what came next. What came next was the hardest part. Not legally. Legally, Seo-rin would build something airtight, and the Whitfields would settle because they could not afford what discovery would reveal. That part he could see clearly. The hard part was the conversation that was waiting for him at 3 o'clock. Because Daniel Cho had been paid to introduce Vanessa to Hyun-woo. And Daniel Cho was Hyun-woo's business partner, the man Min-jae had funded indirectly through the seed money he had given his brother 3 years ago. His money had paid for the salary of the man who had been paid to deliver his brother into a scheme designed to drain Min-jae's accounts. He had financed every piece of this. The cab hit a pothole on 34th, and the jolt went through him physically, and he sat in the back and breathed and held the shape of it. Hyun-woo arrived at his office at 2:58. Min-jae was already there, at the conference table rather than his desk, which he had chosen deliberately. The desk was a power position. The conference table was something else. More neutral, more confrontational in a different way. The arrangement of people who were about to look at the same evidence together, whether they wanted to or not. He had printed 3 things. The bank statement photograph Rachel had sent him. A summary of Seo-rin's initial findings on Whitfield Family Holdings LLC, which had come through an hour ago. And the Columbia alumni event photograph, Daniel Cho and Vanessa Whitfield in the same frame, 2 years ago, 14 months before the gallery. He placed them in the center of the table, face down. Hyun-woo came in and looked at him and at the table and sat without being told to. He had changed clothes. He looked slightly less destroyed than this morning. Showered at least, something closer to functional, though his eyes still had the rawness of someone who had passed through something they could not return from. "Did you eat?" Min-jae said. The question surprised Hyun-woo. "What?" "Today. Did you eat?" He blinked. "Yeah, something." Min-jae nodded. He turned over the first document, the alumni photograph. Hyun-woo looked at it. His brow came together. "That's the Columbia alumni event from 2 years ago," Min-jae said. "That is Vanessa. That is Daniel." Hyun-woo stared at it. "They went to Columbia at the same time. I didn't—" He looked up. "I didn't know they knew each other before." "Daniel didn't tell you." "No." His voice was shifting. "No, he never... He introduced us at the gallery and he said he'd seen her around, but he didn't..." He stopped. Something was happening behind his eyes, a reordering of information he had stored under a different label. He said she looked familiar, but he wasn't sure from where. Min-jae turned over the second document, the bank statement. He watched his brother's face. Hyun-woo read it. He read it again. His hand came up slowly and touched the edge of the paper without meaning to. A reflexive gesture, the way people touched things they weren't sure were real. Min-jae watched his brother's face process the name, the amount, the date, the originating account. "Daniel," Hyun-woo said. Not a question. Something below a question. $25,000. Paid 3 days before your wedding. This was the second installment. The first was paid when you proposed. Hyun-woo's hand had stopped moving. He was very still. Constance Whitfield approached Daniel approximately 6 months before the gallery opening. She had identified me as a target and Daniel as a point of access. She paid him to arrange an introduction between Vanessa and someone in my immediate network. The estrangement story was a tool, not just a casual lie Vanessa told, but a deliberate element of the scheme designed to make her seem independent of family money so that I would feel responsible for providing what she had supposedly lost. He laid it out without inflection, without editorial, the way he would have presented a business case to a board. He watched his brother take it in piece by piece,
and he watched the color change in Hyun-woo's face. Not the chalky white of last night's shock, but something deeper, something with a different quality, more like the gray of someone who is suddenly cold in a room that has not changed temperature.
"She used me," Hyun-woo said. His voice was strange, quiet and stripped of everything that usually lived in it, the ease, the humor, the slight defensive elevation. Just the sentence, bare. "To get to me, yes. She—" He stopped. His jaw was working. "Vanessa, did she know? From the beginning?" "I don't know the full extent of what Vanessa knew about her mother's arrangement with Daniel. What I know is that Vanessa knew the estrangement story was false and chose to use it. Whether she was a full architect or a participant who chose not to ask questions." Min-jae paused. "That distinction may matter less than you think."
Hyun-woo pushed back from the table suddenly, stood, walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and his hands at his sides, and Min-jae let him have the silence. After a long time, Hyun-woo said, 3 years. "What?" "I've known Daniel for 3 years. I built the business with him. He was at—" His voice caught. He pushed through it. "He was at Mom and Dad's memorial with me, last year. He came with me because you were out of the country and I didn't want to go alone." A pause. "He stood at that memorial with me and he had already taken their first payment." Min-jae said nothing. Hyun-woo turned from the window. His face had crossed into something Min-jae had not seen on it before. Not the raw pain of grief or the familiar frustration of their arguments or even the shock of this morning. Something harder. Something that had burned through the other layers and found something underneath that was less forgiving. "What are you going to do?" Hyun-woo said. "Sue them. Civil fraud. Seo-rin is building the case. The bank transfer is direct evidence of the financial arrangement. Daniel's testimony, if he cooperates, confirms the scheme. We go after the Whitfields for the full cost of the wedding, damages, and whatever else Seo-rin can establish." "And Daniel?" The question sat between them. "Daniel is a witness," Min-jae said. "His cooperation determines his exposure." Hyun-woo looked at him for a long moment. "And the business? Our business? The one you funded?" "That's a separate conversation." "Min-jae, I said it's a separate conversation. Right now I need you focused on one thing. Seo-rin is going to need a formal statement from you about everything you knew, when you knew it, and what you were told. Specifically about the estrangement story and the timeline of when Vanessa corrected it." He looked at his brother. "I need that statement to be complete. Nothing protected, nothing softened. You understand what I'm asking?" "You're asking me to testify against my wife." "I'm asking you to tell the truth about what was done to both of us." Hyun-woo stood at the window with that for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through at an angle that caught the dust in the air and made the room look like something suspended, paused, waiting. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. I want to talk to Daniel first." He said it quickly, before Min-jae could respond. "Before Seo-rin's people get to him. I want—" His voice broke once, just briefly. "I need to hear it from him. I need him to say it to my face." "That's not—" "I know it's not procedure. I know you'll say it could compromise the statement. I don't care." His eyes were direct, and there was something in them that was done negotiating. "He stood at my parents' memorial. He was my business partner. I thought he was my friend. I need to hear him say it." Min-jae looked at his brother, at the man his brother had become in the last 18 hours. Not the careless, laughing, slightly reckless version that had been convenient and familiar, but something that had been burned down to a harder material underneath. He picked up his phone and called Seo-rin. "Hold on, Cho," he said when she answered. "Don't approach him yet. Give it 2 hours." A pause. "That's a risk." "I know, 2 hours." He ended the call and looked at Hyun-woo. 2 hours. Then Seo-rin's people will be at his door whether you're done or not." Hyun-woo nodded. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He was almost at the door when his phone buzzed. He looked at it and went completely still. Min-jae watched his brother's face. "What?" he said. Hyun-woo turned the phone around. It was a message from Vanessa. 4 words and a photograph. The photograph showed a document, a legal document, the header visible enough to read. A countersuit filing. Vanessa Whitfield versus Kang Min-jae. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Tortious interference with marriage. Defamation. The 4 words above the photograph said, "You chose the wrong side." Min-jae looked at the document on the screen. He looked at it carefully and completely, and when he looked up, his face was exactly as it had been, neutral, contained, giving nothing away. But something had shifted in the room, some atmospheric change, the specific pressure drop that happened before. The countersuit was filed at 4:17 in the afternoon. Min-jae knew the exact time because Seo-rin called him 40 seconds after it hit the court system, and her voice had the particular quality it got when she was managing something that had just become significantly more complicated. Not panicked, never panicked, but sharpened to a finer edge than usual. "They moved fast," she said. "They had it ready." He was still in the conference room. Hyun-woo had left 12 minutes ago to find Daniel Cho. The legal document was still on his phone screen. They filed before we could establish the fraud narrative publicly. They want to control the story. Intentional infliction of emotional distress is a weak claim. Tortious interference with marriage is almost impossible to sustain. The defamation angle is the one with teeth. They'll argue your speech at the reception constituted public defamation. Did it? No. You stated facts about your own financial contributions. That's not defamation. A pause. But it will take time to establish that in court. Time during which their version of events gets equal coverage. Min-jae looked at the window. The afternoon light had shifted while he wasn't paying attention, gone from the suspended amber quality of an hour ago to something flatter, more industrial. The city outside was doing its late afternoon thing. The density of movement increasing, the streets thickening with people heading somewhere else. "Their betting will settle to avoid the publicity," he said. "Yes? They're wrong. I know." He could hear her typing. "I'm filing our fraud complaint tonight. I want to be in the system before morning. Once our filing is public, their countersuit looks like exactly what it is. A preemptive defensive move by people who know what's coming. Do it. I need Daniel Cho's statement before I file. The bank transfer is strong, but the testimony completes the picture. Hyun-woo has 2 hours with him. Then your people move." A pause that meant she disagreed with the timeline, but had accepted it. "There's something else. The Whitfield family attorney contacted me 20 minutes ago, before the countersuit was filed, which means they filed it immediately after the call." She paused. "He said Constance Whitfield wants a meeting, face-to-face. She called it a conversation between reasonable people." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. "Where?" "Their attorney's office in Midtown, tomorrow morning." "Tell him I'll be there at 9, he said. "Tell him I'm bringing my attorney." "Min-jae, I want to see her face when she understands what we have." He ended the call. He sat alone in the conference room for 3 minutes, not thinking. He had been thinking continuously for 36 hours, and the thinking was done, the analysis complete, the picture fully assembled. He was just sitting, breathing, allowing his body to exist in a moment of stillness before the next thing. Then he stood and put on his jacket and went to find Thomas. "Ochaz." The call from Hyun-woo came at 6:44. Min-jae was in the back of the car, heading nowhere in particular because sitting still in the penthouse was not something he could manage tonight, and Thomas was doing what Thomas did, driving with the calm of a man who understood that sometimes the destination was beside the point. He answered immediately. Hyun-woo's voice was different from anything he'd heard from his brother in the last 2 days. Not the manufactured anger of yesterday morning, not the stripped bare admission of this morning. This was something quieter, and in some ways more frightening because it was the voice of a person who had been through something and come out on the other side of it with very little left. "He told me everything," Hyun-woo said. "All of it. All of it. The approach from Constance, the money, the gallery, all of it." A breath. "He says Vanessa knew her mother had arranged the introduction. She didn't know Daniel had been paid. She thought it was a favor, a social arrangement, but she knew it wasn't organic. She knew from the beginning that meeting you was the point." Min-jae absorbed this. "He's willing to give a statement," Hyun-woo said. "Full cooperation. He's in bad shape. He's been in bad shape for months, apparently. Rachel was right about that." "Where are you?" "Still at his place. Seo-rin's people are here. They've been here 20 minutes. A pause. "He asked me if you were going to destroy him." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I didn't know." Another pause, longer. "Are you?" Min-jae looked out the window at the city moving past. A woman walking fast with a paper bag of groceries. A man on a phone at a crosswalk. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday evening in a city that did not know or care about any particular person's particular crisis. He cooperates fully. His exposure is a civil matter, a manageable one. He paused. That's the truth. A long exhale from Hyunwoo's end. Okay. Go home. Sleep. Be at Seorin's office at 8 tomorrow. Where are you going? To meet Constance Whitfield at 9. The silence on Hyunwoo's end lasted 4 seconds. I want to be there. No. No. Flat and final. Not tomorrow, not that room. You'll get your moment, but not that one. A pause. Then, okay. He ended the call and sat with the quiet. The attorney's office was on the 38th floor of a building on 52nd Street, the kind of office that communicated seriousness through the specific restraint of its furniture. Everything expensive, nothing showy, the aesthetic of people who did not need to prove anything to anyone who mattered. The reception area had real art on the walls, and a receptionist who said good morning with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to make powerful people feel appropriately received. Seorin was already there when Min-jae arrived at 8:57. She had a leather portfolio and the expression she wore when she had not slept enough but was not going to let that be visible in any way that mattered. She looked at him once and he looked at her, and they did not need to say anything about the night before or the filing or the 100 decisions that had happened between yesterday's conference room and this moment. They're inside, she said. Constance, her husband, their attorney, a second attorney I don't recognize. Second chair? I think so, someone younger, probably handling the countersuit specifically. She adjusted the portfolio. Our fraud filing went in at 11:40 last night. It's in the system. They know. Good. They were shown into the conference room at 9 exactly. Constance Whitfield was already seated at the far end of the table, and she looked. Min-jae noted this with the same impersonal attention he gave to everything, like a woman who had spent the previous night deciding exactly what version of herself to bring to this room. She was composed, dressed carefully, the specific careful of someone who had thought about what their clothing communicated. Her husband, a man named Gerald who Min-jae had met once at a charity event 2 years ago and who had at the time seemed pleasant and slightly peripheral, sat to her right with the expression of a man who was present because he was supposed to be and who would not be the one talking. The lead attorney was named Pierce. Min-jae had looked him up last night. 15 years in civil litigation, a firm with a good reputation, not the best in the city, but solidly competent. The second attorney was indeed young, late 20s, female, sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses, holding a legal pad. They sat. The room arranged itself. Pierce opened. Thank you for coming on short notice. Our client believes that the current situation... Before we do this, Min-jae said, I want to speak to Mrs. Whitfield directly. Pierce's professional composure held. I'd prefer that any communication... I know what you'd prefer. Min-jae looked at Constance. You asked for a conversation between reasonable people. I'm here. Talk to me. A moment. Pierce looked at Constance. Something passed between them, a small negotiation conducted entirely in facial expression, and Constance unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. Mr. Kang, she said. Her voice was warm. It was the same warmth he had watched her deploy at the wedding, calibrated and precise, and pointed at whoever she was speaking to. I want to begin by acknowledging that last night, 14 months ago, he said. She paused. That's where this begins. Not last night. 14 months ago, when you identified me, researched my financial profile, located a point of access in my brother's business partner, and paid him to engineer an introduction. He watched her face. That's where the conversation starts, Mrs. Whitfield. The warmth had not disappeared from her face, but something had moved underneath it. A subtle shift in the architecture, like a building whose foundation has been touched. I don't know what you think you... Daniel Cho gave a full statement last night. He said it quietly, without emphasis. The way you say something that does not need emphasis. The wire transfer from Whitfield Family Holdings, LLC, is documented. $25,000, 3 days before the wedding. The first installment when Hyun-woo proposed. We have the bank records. and we have the testimony. He paused. We have the photograph from the Columbia alumni event establishing that Vanessa and Daniel knew each other 2 years before the gallery opening where they supposedly met by chance. Constance Whitfield's face had gone through several things in a very short period of time and was now residing in something that was not yet surrender, but was no longer the warm, controlled surface she had brought into the room. Her attorney touched her arm. Constance, our fraud complaint was filed with the court at 11:40 last night, Seorin said, entering the conversation for the first time with the specific calm of someone placing a final piece on a board. It is a matter of public record as of this morning. The filing includes the bank transfer documentation, a summary of Cho's statement, and a timeline establishing that the introduction between Vanessa Whitfield and Hyun-woo Kang was a paid, orchestrated event conducted under false pretenses.
Yeah. She opened the portfolio. In terms of the countersuit your clients filed yesterday afternoon, we are prepared to answer each claim in detail. We would also note that the filing of a countersuit by a party who has already engaged in demonstrable fraud will be relevant context for any judge reviewing the complaint. The room was very quiet.
Pierce said, "We'd like to request a brief recess to, No, Min-jae said. Pierce stopped. "You asked for this meeting. You have it." He looked at Constance. "I want to understand something. Not for the lawsuit. For myself." He leaned forward slightly. "You spent over a year building this. You identified me, you found Daniel, you paid him, you deployed your daughter, you were patient, you were methodical, you are clearly an intelligent woman." He paused. "What did you think was going to happen when I found out?" The question sat in the room. Constance Whitfield looked at him, and for the first time since he had walked in, she looked like herself. Not the performance version, not the warm, calibrated surface, but the person underneath who had made the decision 14 months ago and had lived with it since. Her eyes were very still. "I thought," she said slowly, "that by the time there was anything to find out, the marriage would be established enough that finding out wouldn't matter. Because I would protect Hyun-woo. Because you protect everything you consider yours." The honesty of it was almost remarkable. He sat with it for a moment. "You were right about that," he said, "and wrong about everything else." He stood. "Here's what happens next. Your attorneys and mine will work out the settlement. I'm not going to tell you the number right now because that is what Seorin is for. What I will tell you is that the number will reflect the full cost of what you built. The wedding expenditures, the legal costs, the investigative costs, the damages. It will be large enough to be real, and I will not negotiate it down because you are embarrassed or because Gerald looks uncomfortable." He glanced at Gerald, who did look deeply uncomfortable. "The countersuit will be withdrawn as a condition of settlement. If it is not withdrawn, we proceed to litigation, and everything in our filing becomes public record at a level of detail that your family's social standing will not survive." "Bamans Mausin." He picked up his jacket. "The alternative," he continued, "is that we litigate. Full discovery. Everything about the financial situation of Whitfield Family Holdings, LLC, becomes part of the record. The mortgage on the Connecticut property, the dissolved business interests, the wire transfer, Daniel Cho's testimony and deposition." He looked at Constance one more time. "You selected me because you thought I would pay for the performance of family. You were right about that, too. I paid for it for 14 months. He paused. "I'm done paying now." He walked to the door. "Mr. Kang." Constance's voice. He stopped, did not turn. For what it's worth, Vanessa did care for him, whatever else was true. She did. He stood with that for 1 second. "It's not worth much," he said, and walked out. The settlement negotiation lasted 6 days. Min-jae was not present for most of it. That was Seorin's room, and he trusted her completely in it, and inserting himself would have been a way of managing his own anxiety rather than advancing the outcome. He went to his office. He dealt with the legitimate businesses. He answered the accumulating questions from his board about the viral video, which had now been viewed 11 million times, and had generated a press cycle that was still active, and which he addressed in a single written statement drafted by Seo-rin that said nothing interesting and gave the media nothing useful. The video had split the public response cleanly down a line he found almost predictable. Half the coverage was about the scorned man who had humiliated his brother's wedding in a display of financial ego. The other half was about the wealthy Korean businessman who had been systematically targeted and defrauded by a family who saw him as a resource rather than a person. He read both versions and found neither of them accurate and did not engage with either. On the fourth day, Vanessa's attorney contacted Seo Rin separately from the Whitfield family's attorney. Vanessa was filing for divorce. She wanted no contact from Hyun Woo, no dispute of the divorce terms, a clean break. She was withdrawing from the countersuit as an individual. She would not be named in the settlement, could not be, her attorney argued, because she had not been a party to the financial arrangement between her mother and Daniel Cho. Seorin called Min Jae about this, and he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Let Hyun Woo decide." Hyun Woo decided not to contest the divorce. He told Min Jae this on the phone, briefly, without going into the emotional architecture of the decision, which Min Jae appreciated. He said he just wanted it finished. Min Jae said that was reasonable. They did not say much else. The space between them was still large and still required careful navigation, and both of them were, by some unspoken agreement, moving through it slowly. The settlement was signed on day 6. Min Jae did not celebrate. He was not built for celebration. He was in Seorin's conference room when the signed documents came through, and he read the final terms and looked at the total figure and nodded once, and told Seorin she had done good work, and she said, "I know." And they ordered food from the place down the block that did reasonable Korean food and ate it at the conference table and talked about other things. The Whitfield family paid the full amount. The countersuit was withdrawn. Constance Whitfield and her husband sold the Connecticut property 8 weeks later, which Min Jae learned about incidentally and which he received without satisfaction. It was information. Just information. Daniel Cho dissolved his business partnership with Hyun Woo 6 days after giving his statement. He sent Hyun Woo a letter, a physical letter, handwritten, that Min Jae never read and that Hyun Woo never described in detail. He said only that it existed and that he had read it twice and that it didn't fix anything but that it was real. And Min Jae understood this and said nothing further about Daniel Cho. Vanessa disappeared from their lives with the clean efficiency of someone who had already prepared for this outcome. There were no dramatic final communications, no public statements, no social media activity. She was there and then she was not there, and the absence was its own kind of information about what had been real and what had been performance. Hyun Woo moved out of the apartment he had shared with her and found a smaller place in Brooklyn and went back to work and said very little. He called Min Jae on the third Tuesday after the settlement in the evening and talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. A restaurant he had tried, something he had read, the specific quality of the Brooklyn light in October, and Min Jae sat in his penthouse and listened and understood that this was the form reconciliation was going to take for now, at least. Small, careful, the slow reconstruction of ordinary contact. He accepted this. He was not yet ready for more, and neither, he suspected, was Hyun Woo. Gotten. 3 weeks after the settlement, Min Jae was sitting in Seorin's office going through the financial accounting of the settlement funds when she slid a folder across the table. "This isn't legal work," she said. He opened it. It was a concept proposal. 3 pages, dense but organized, with numbers and a structural outline and a name at the top, New Horizon Foundation. He looked up at her. "I've been thinking about it since the settlement came in," she said. "The amount is significant. More than you need for personal restoration. More than makes sense to simply absorb." She tapped the folder. "There are people in this city who get used the way you were used, not always at this scale, sometimes at much smaller scales. People who get taken by the people they trust most and who have no resources, no legal access, no one who understands the mechanics of what was done to them." She paused. "You understand those mechanics better than almost anyone I know." Min Jae looked at the folder, at the name at the top, New Horizon. He turned the pages slowly. The proposal was detailed and serious, and Seorin had clearly been thinking about it for longer than 3 weeks. Legal aid, counseling access, financial literacy resources, a partnership structure with existing nonprofits, a board model that kept it insulated from the kind of mission drift that killed most foundations within a decade. He read it to the end. He set it down. "This is good work," he said. "I know." He looked at the window. Outside, the city was doing its October thing, the light different from September. Something in it that was more honest somehow, less forgiving. The clarity that came after the warmth was gone. Set up the incorporation, he said. Use the settlement funds as the founding capital. I'll match them from my personal account. Seorin nodded. She had expected this answer. She reached for the folder and then stopped. One more thing, she said. The foundation is going to need a trauma component. Someone who understands the psychological dimension of what happens to people when the betrayal comes from inside the family structure. She slid a single page across the table, a resume, printed cleanly, a photograph in the upper right corner. I know someone. She runs a program in Harlem currently, works with family abuse survivors. She's been looking to expand the model for 2 years and hasn't found the right infrastructure. Seorin paused. Her name is Amani Brooks. Min-jae looked at the resume. At the photograph, a woman in her mid-30s, direct eyes, the specific quality of someone who looked at you rather than past you. He read the credentials. He read the program description. He read the client impact summary at the bottom of the page. He set the page down. Outside, a siren moved through the city below, east to west, and faded, and the room was quiet again. Min-jae sat in that quiet and breathed and thought about a foundation and a woman's resume and the strange shape that a life could take when the thing you had built got destroyed and you had to decide from the rubble what came next. Set up a meeting, he said. Seorin reached for her pen. And Seorin, he looked at her. Make it a professional meeting, a proper one. I'm not... He paused, considered the sentence. I just want to discuss the foundation. Seorin's expression did not change. Of course, she said, and wrote something in her portfolio that he could not see, and he understood from the particular stillness of her face that she had already decided several things about this that she was not going to share with him yet. He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold while he was reading. He drank it anyway. The meeting with Amani Brooks was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10 in a coffee shop in Harlem 2 blocks from her program office. Min-jae arrived first, which was his nature, and sat at a corner table and ordered water and waited. She arrived at 2 minutes past 10, which he noted not as a flaw but as information. She was not the kind of person who arrived early to establish territorial advantage, which already told him something about how she operated. She was wearing a dark blue coat over professional clothes, carrying a tote bag with papers spilling from the top in a way that suggested a person who managed significant complexity and had made peace with its visual evidence. She spotted him immediately and crossed the room without hesitation and put out her hand. Mr. Kang. Miss Brooks. Her handshake was direct. She sat without ceremony. She had already looked at him once, fully, in the way he recognized from people who were professionally trained to assess human beings quickly and accurately, and then moved past the assessment into the actual moment of being in the room with him, which was different from most people he met who spent the entire interaction subtly reviewing what they had first concluded. I read the foundation concept proposal, she said. Seorin sent it over. She did. She pulled a folder from the tote bag. I made notes. He looked at the folder. It was dense. She had been thorough. Tell me, he said. She opened the folder, and for the next 40 minutes, she took the proposal apart and rebuilt it, section by section, with the specific attention of someone who understood both the theory and the ground-level reality of what it was trying to do. She knew the gaps between legal aid frameworks and psychological recovery timelines. She knew which partner organizations were actually functional and which had good branding and poor execution. She knew the specific shape of trauma that came from family betrayal as distinct from other kinds. The particular damage of having the structure you built your safety inside be the thing that harmed you. She did not ask him why he was building this. He noticed this. Most people would have asked. The viral video was still available to anyone with a phone, and the story had been widely covered, and the connection between Kang Min-jae and a foundation focused on family betrayal was not a difficult inference. She had clearly made the inference and had chosen not to center it. She was here about the work. He found this not moving exactly, but notable. The way something structurally sound was notable. You recognized it because of the contrast with everything that was not. The trauma counseling component needs more infrastructure than the current proposal allocates, she said. The model I run in Harlem operates on a ratio of 1 counselor to 11 active clients. That's already too high. If you're scaling this to serve the population you're describing, You need to build the counseling capacity before the legal referral pipeline, not after. Otherwise, you'll create a bottleneck that burns out the clinical staff in 8 months and leaves clients in worse shape than before they came in. What ratio do you need? 1:7 to start. Then you assess at the 6-month mark. That's a significant staffing cost. Yes. She looked at him directly. Is that a problem? He looked at her for a moment. No. Something in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a slight recalibration, an adjustment of the initial reading she had made of him when she sat down. She made a note in the folder. They talked for another 20 minutes. He asked questions that were specific, and she answered them without padding. She challenged 2 of the structural assumptions in the proposal, and she was right about both of them, and he told her so without making it a compliment, just as information, and she received it the same way. When they were done, she closed the folder and looked at him. Why me? She said. Seorin said she recommended me, but you made the decision. There are other practitioners with comparable credentials who work in this space. He considered the question. Your program model, he said. The emphasis on the specific psychology of family source betrayal. The distinction between that and other trauma categories, he paused. Most practitioners treat it as a subset of general betrayal trauma. You treat it as its own category with its own recovery architecture. That's correct. And most people don't understand that it's correct. She looked at him for a moment. You understand it because you've lived it. It was not a question, and it was not intrusive. It was stated with the flatness of a professional observation. He met her gaze. Yes, he said. She nodded, made another note. I'll need to see the full financial model before I commit, she said, and I want approval rights over the clinical director hire. That position is the foundation's most critical appointment, and I won't attach my program to an infrastructure that gets it wrong. Agreed. I also want a board seat. Seorin will want one too. Good. She almost smiled. She seems like someone worth arguing with in a boardroom. He said, she is. They stood. She put the folder back in the tote bag with the rest of the organized chaos. She put on her coat. She looked at him one more time with the same direct reading she had done when she sat down, and this time the assessment was slightly different. He could not have named the difference. He was usually better at reading people than he was managing to be in this particular moment, which was itself unusual. Thursday works, she said. I'll have the financial model questions to Seorin by end of week. I'll have the full budget breakdown to you by Wednesday. She put out her hand again. He shook it. She walked out. He remained at the corner table for a moment and looked at the door, and then at the water he had ordered and never drunk, and then at the city through the coffee shop window. October light, honest and clear, the warmth fully gone now, the air doing that thing it did in this city in fall, where it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end, which he had always found slightly irrational but had never been able to stop noticing. He picked up his phone. He called Thomas. Ready? He said. He walked out into the October morning, and the city closed around him, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment before getting in the car, and he breathed and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but its precursor, the specific opening of a space where something might eventually grow, the way ground felt after it had been cleared of everything that was growing in it wrong. He got in the car. Where to? Thomas said. Min-jae looked out the window. The Harlem street was moving around him. A school group on the sidewalk, a food delivery cyclist threading between stopped cars, 2 women talking outside a laundromat with the ease of a conversation that had been going on for years. The office, he said. He had work to do. The New Horizon Foundation opened its doors on a Wednesday in February, 4 months after the settlement was signed. Not with a press event, not with a ribbon cutting or a reception or any of the ceremonial architecture that organizations use to announce themselves to the world. Min-jae had been explicit about this. The foundation would open when the clinical staff were in place, the legal aid partnerships were operational, and the intake process was ready to receive actual people with actual problems. Not a day before, and not with fanfare. Seorin had argued mildly for at least a soft launch event, something modest, something that established the foundation's public presence in a way that would support future funding conversations. He had listened to her argument and understood its logic and told her they would do a proper public event at the 6-month mark when they had real outcomes to discuss, not intentions. She had written something in her portfolio and let it go. The office space was on the fourth floor of a building in Harlem, 2 blocks from the program Amani ran, which had been Amani's condition and which had taken 6 weeks to negotiate with the landlord, and which Minjae had ultimately resolved by paying 18 months of rent in advance. The space was clean and functional and deliberately not impressive. Good furniture, adequate light, the specific lack of ornamentation that communicated to people walking in that the money here was spent on staff and service rather than on telling you the money was spent well. Amani had overseen the interior layout. She had been specific about sight lines and waiting area privacy and the placement of the counseling rooms relative to the reception desk. She said that people who came here would already be in a fragile state and that the physical environment either helped or made it worse, and there was no neutral option. Minjae had watched her move through the empty space on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks before opening, pointing and explaining and occasionally pushing a piece of furniture 2 feet to the left to demonstrate a principle. And he had said very little, and she had not asked him to say anything, just to look at what she was showing him. He had looked. He had understood. He had written the check for the additional counseling room she needed. On the morning of the first day, he arrived at 7:30 before the staff. He walked through the empty office with his hands in his pockets and looked at what had been built in 4 months from the money that the Whitfields had paid and the matching funds he had added from his personal account. It was not large. It was not what most people would call impressive. It was real, and it was ready, and it was built correctly, which were the only 3 things that mattered. He stood at the window of his small office at the back of the space. He had insisted on a small office, smaller than Amani's, which she had noted without comment, and looked at the Harlem street below. The February morning was gray and cold, the sidewalks carrying the compressed, purposeful movement of people who had somewhere to be and were focused on getting there. He watched them for a few minutes. He thought about his parents. Not often. He had learned early that sustained grief was a luxury that cost more than he could afford, and he had trained himself to think about them briefly and with focus, rather than letting it spread into something unmanageable. His mother's hands, his father's voice on the phone the night before they drove to the airport for the last time. The specific quality of that voice that had been tired but not alarmed. The ordinary tiredness of a Tuesday. No signal that it was the last sound of its kind Minjae would ever hear. He thought about 9-year-old Hyun-woo in the Flushing apartment, not yet understanding. He thought about the decision he had made at 19, which had not felt like a decision because it had felt like the only possible response to what was true. He stood at the window until he heard the key in the front door and the sound of the first staff member arriving, and then he straightened his jacket and went out to start the day. So, the first client came in at 9:15. Minjae did not see her. That was not his role, and he understood his role clearly. He was in his office reviewing the financial projections for the second quarter when Amani appeared in his doorway at 9:20 with a coffee in each hand and set one on his desk without being asked and leaned against the doorframe. "First intake," she said. "I heard her come in. Young woman, 24. Her family took out credit cards in her name without telling her. Parents. She found out when her credit application for an apartment was denied." Amani looked at the coffee in her hand. She cried through the first 10 minutes of the intake form. He said nothing. He picked up the coffee. "The legal aid coordinator is with her now," Amani said. "I'll see her after." "Good." She looked at him for a moment. "How are you?" The question was direct and unadorned, the way she asked most things, without the social cushioning that the question usually carried. He had noticed over the past 4 months that she asked it as an actual inquiry rather than a greeting, which meant she expected an actual answer. "Fine," he said. She waited. "Better than I expected to be," he amended. She nodded once, accepting this as the more accurate version. "The board meeting is at 2. Seo-rin sent the agenda this morning. It's long." "It's always long." She added 3 items last night. "It's always very long." Something moved at the corner of Amani's mouth. Not quite a smile, but in the same neighborhood. She pushed off the doorframe and went back to her work, and Minjae sat in the small office with his coffee and the February light coming through the window and the sound of the foundation operating its first morning around him. Hyun-woo called in March. Not the careful, small contact calls of October and November, the ones about restaurants and books and the Brooklyn light. This was a different call. He asked if he could come to the penthouse, which he had not done since the morning Min-jae had told him to leave. He came on a Saturday afternoon, which felt right. Not a workday, not a formal meeting, just a Saturday. The city quieter than usual. The kind of afternoon that existed in a different register from the relentless weekday forward motion. He looked better. Not fully restored, Min-jae was not sure Hyun-woo would ever look quite the way he had before the wedding. The specific unguarded openness that had been his most recognizable quality, and he was not sure that was a loss worth mourning entirely. What he looked like was settled. Someone who had been through something and had done the work of sitting with it rather than moving past it, and who was now on the other side of that work. He sat at the kitchen counter where he had always sat when he came here in the years before, when coming here was ordinary and unremarkable. Min-jae made coffee without asking. "I'm selling my share of the business," Hyun-woo said. Min-jae set a cup in front of him. "To who?" "There's a buyer, someone Daniel and I had talked to before all of this. He's still interested." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "I don't want it anymore. The business itself is fine, but everything attached to it is wrong now. I need to start something I built from the beginning." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet." He said this without distress, which was new. "I'm okay not knowing for a little while." He paused. "I talked to a therapist. 3 times so far." Min-jae looked at him. "How is that?" "Hard. Useful." He looked down at the coffee. "She asked me why I let myself be used as the mechanism for something aimed at my own brother. I didn't have a good answer." "Do you have one now?" Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment. "I think I believe that being close to Vanessa's world was a way of becoming something different from what I was. What we were." He said it carefully, like someone who had assembled the sentence over a period of weeks. "I think I wanted to belong to something that felt established, old, safe in a way that money you built yourself doesn't feel safe." Min-jae listened. "I think I knew something was wrong and I chose to not look at it, because looking at it would have meant losing what I wanted." He looked up. "And I told myself you were controlling, that you were the problem, because that was easier than what was actually true." The penthouse was quiet. Outside, a siren moved through the distance and faded. "I'm not going to tell you it was okay," Min-jae said, "because it wasn't. I know. I'm going to tell you that I understand the shape of it, what you were looking for." He paused. "I've been looking for a version of the same thing my whole life. I just looked for it by building something instead of by marrying into something." Hyun-woo looked at him. "The foundation." "Partly." Min-jae picked up his own coffee. "There's someone. It's early, nothing decided, but there's someone who sees—" He stopped, considered the sentence. "Someone who sees the actual situation clearly and is here anyway." Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment, reading him. "Amani Brooks." Min-jae looked at him. "Seo-rin." "Of course." Hyun-woo almost smiled. "Is Seo-rin happy about it?" "Seo-rin is professionally appropriate about it, which for her is the equivalent of happy." Hyun-woo laughed. It was a small laugh, nothing like the full-volume version of before, but it was real. It moved through the kitchen and settled, and the room felt different after it. Not better exactly, not restored, but honest. The laugh of someone who had lost something and was learning to be present in what remained. "I'm sorry, Hyung," he said. Not the way he had said it in the office doorway in November, which had been real but also desperate, carrying the weight of someone trying to stop bleeding. This was quieter, drier. The apology of someone who was not asking for anything in return, just stating a fact about themselves that they needed said out loud. Min-jae looked at his brother, at the face that had their mother's mouth and their father's jaw and 10 additional years of a life that had been harder than it should have been and would now, Min-jae thought, probably be better for it, which was not a comfortable thing to believe, but was the truth as best he understood it. "I know," he said. They drank their coffee, they talked about other things, the sale timeline for the business, a film Hyun-woo had seen in Brooklyn, whether the coffee place 2 blocks from the penthouse had gotten better or worse, a question they had argued about for 3 years without resolution. The afternoon moved around them. The February light that had been sharp in the morning had softened by the time Hyun-woo left, going toward something warmer at the edges, the city outside doing its slow negotiation with the approaching spring.
Min-jae stood at the window after Hyun-woo left and felt the quiet of the apartment without finding it empty. That was new. For most of his adult life, the quiet of his own space had carried a weight to it, a density, the specific silence of a person who had structured their life around work because work was the thing that did not betray you. The quiet now was different, still quiet, but different.
Son, Amani told him on a Thursday evening in April. They were in her office at the foundation, after hours, reviewing the 3-month impact report that the board had requested. The building was empty around them. Through the window, the Harlem street was doing its early spring evening thing. Still light at 7, the air carrying the first suggestion of warmth that wouldn't fully arrive for weeks yet. People moving a little slower than they had in February. The specific collective relief of a city that had made it through another winter. She was explaining a section of the counseling outcome data when she stopped. Mid-sentence. She looked at the report and then at him and then back at the report. "I need to say something," she said. He looked at her. "And I need you to understand that I'm saying it in a personal capacity, not as a board member or as the clinical director." She set the report down. "And that I'm saying it once. I'm not going to manage around it or approach it strategically." "Okay," he said. She looked at him with the reading look she had, the one that had startled him at the first meeting because it did not calculate the way most people's assessments did. "I think you are one of the most careful people I have ever met," she said. "And I think you are careful because you spent a very long time in situations where the cost of a mistake was enormous, and you survived by being precise and controlled and always 3 steps ahead." She paused. "And I think that made you successful, and it also made you very alone." He did not say anything. "I think you're trying to be less alone," she said. "I think the foundation is part of that. And I think—" She stopped, breathed. For the first time since he had known her, she looked like someone who was not entirely sure of their footing. "I think you and I have been doing something over the past 4 months that is not entirely about the foundation. And I want to name it because I don't do well with things that are true but unnamed." The room was very quiet. "I think that's accurate," he said. She looked at him. "I don't need it to be anything right now. I'm not asking for a decision or a declaration. I'm just—" She picked up the report and set it down again, a small gesture that was the closest to nervous he had ever seen her. "I'm naming it, because it's real." He leaned forward slightly. "Amani." She looked at him. "I have been trying," he said carefully, "for approximately 3 months to determine the right moment to say something similar. I have not found the right moment because I am, as you accurately identified, extremely careful in a way that is sometimes a problem." He paused. "I'm glad you named it." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression settled, not relief exactly, more like the resolution of a tension that had been held for a sustained period and could now, finally, be released. "The report," she said. "The report can wait." She almost smiled. Then she fully smiled, which was something he had seen before but which still had the quality of something you needed to be present for rather than something you could carry with you from memory. "Okay," she said. They stayed in the office for another 2 hours and talked about things that were not the report, and the Harlem street outside went through its full spring evening arc, and the city lights came on, and neither of them noticed exactly when. Betrayal. The 6-month gala was held on a Friday evening in August, not at the Grande Meridian, not anywhere that carried the weight of before. Amani had found a space in Harlem, a converted warehouse that a local arts organization used for events, industrial bones dressed with good lighting and honest materials, nothing pretending to be something else. It held 200 people comfortably, and it felt, when you were inside it, like a space where the right things could be said without the room itself getting in the way. Min-jae arrived early. His nature. He stood near the entrance and watched the space fill. The foundation's clients were there. Not all of them. Not those for whom a public event was wrong, but those who had agreed and who moved through the room with the specific quality of people who had survived something and were in the early stages of understanding what that meant for who they would be next. The legal aid partners were there, the counseling staff, the board, including Seo Rin, who was talking to a city council member in a way that suggested she had opinions and was sharing them without apology, which was simply Seo Rin operating at her natural level. Yunwoo was there. He had asked if he could come, and Min-jae had said yes without hesitation. He stood near the bar with a drink he was mostly not touching, wearing a jacket that fit well, and looking at the room with the expression of someone who was learning to be present in spaces that meant something, rather than spaces that impressed someone. He caught Min-jae's eye from across the room and nodded once. Min-jae nodded back. It was small, and it was enough. Amani was moving through the room with the ease of someone in their element, stopping to speak with clients, with staff, with the Foundation's partner organizations, touching an arm here, asking a question there. Her presence in the space doing the specific thing that good presence did, which was make everyone it touched feel located, accounted for, seen. He watched her from a distance for a moment without going to her, just watching. The way you watched something that you still found slightly improbable in the best sense, the sense that meant it was real. She looked up and found him. She crossed the room. She was in a dark dress he had not seen before, and she had a glass of water, and she came to stand beside him rather than in front of him, both of them facing the room together, which was a small thing that was not a small thing. "How are you?" she said. "Good," he said, and meant it. She looked out at the room, at the clients and the staff, and the people whose lives had been changed in 6 months by something that had been built from the wreckage of something else. 217 intakes in 6 months, she said. 63 legal cases actively managed. 41 counseling clients in sustained treatment. I read the report. I know, I'm saying it out loud because it matters more out loud. She paused. 217 people who came through a door because you built it. He looked at the room, at the faces of people he did not know personally, but who had, in some sense, been the purpose of the past 8 months without knowing it. The young woman whose family had taken out credit cards in her name. The man in his 50s, whose business partner of 12 years had been redirecting funds for half a decade. The woman who had come in barely able to speak, and who was standing near the back of the room now, talking to the legal aid coordinator with her hands moving and her eyes animated, telling something that had a shape. He thought about the morning of the wedding, the 11 minutes of silence in the dark, the thing he had felt but not been able to name. He understood it now. It had been the last morning of something he had been trying to preserve past the point of its natural end. The version of himself that paid for belonging, that subsidized proximity, that had confused the financing of a family with the having of one. That morning had been its last quiet morning, and by evening it was over and he had walked out of a ballroom and into something that was going to take a long time to build and would be real when it was done. Soren appeared at his elbow. "The program starts in 12 minutes, she said. "The council member wants 3 minutes at the podium. I told him 2. "Give him 2.5, Min-jae said. He helped with the zoning. Theorin made a note. She looked at Amani. Something passed between them that was entirely female and that Min-jae did not attempt to decode. Seorin's expression did not change, but her eyes did something very brief, and she moved away toward the podium. "She approved," Amani said. "She approved 8 weeks ago," he said. "She's been waiting for you to know it." Amani looked at him with the reading look. "She told you that?" She didn't have to. She looked back at the room. He looked at the room. Around them the evening moved, the light shifting as more guests arrived, the ambient sound building to the warm, productive hum of a space full of people who were there for something that mattered. The specific quality of an August evening in New York, when the heat had finally softened and the city remembered how to breathe. He gave a short speech at 9 o'clock. He had written it himself, and Seorin had reviewed it and made 2 edits which he had accepted without argument because she was right. It was 5 minutes. He talked about the Foundation's 6-month numbers. He talked about what the work was trying to do and why. He did not talk about the wedding or Vanessa or the Whitfields or any of what had preceded the Foundation's creation, because the people in this room did not need his origin story. They needed to know the institution they had walked into was built to last. He said, near the end, that he had learned something in the past year that he had taken 39 years to understand. That the structures we build to protect ourselves can become the walls that keep us from what we actually need. That the dismantling of something you built your whole life around is the most frightening thing that can happen, and that on the other side of it, if you are still standing, you find out what you were actually made of. He did not say more than that. He did not turn it into a lesson or an exhortation. He just let it land and then thanked the staff and the partners and the clients and stepped away from the podium.
Amani was standing near the back of the room when he came off the stage. She was holding her water glass, and she had an expression he had learned over the past 4 months to read, which was the expression of someone who had heard something real and was deciding not to comment on it directly because the comment would reduce it. He came to stand beside her again. The room was applauding, and then the applause settled and the evening moved forward. "Good speech," she said. It was honest. "That's why it was good." They stood together in the room, and the night continued around them. Later, much later, after the guests had thinned and the staff was beginning to break down the catering setup, and Seorin had left with the council members still talking at her, they sat in 2 chairs near the window that looked out at the Harlem street, which was doing its late Friday evening thing, loose and warm, the summer city expressing itself without urgency. Amani had taken off her shoes and had one knee pulled up in the chair and was reading something on her phone that was work-related. He could tell by the slight tension in her forehead, and he was sitting with a glass of water watching the street. They were not talking. The silence between them was the kind that was comfortable in the way that only silence between people who knew each other well could be comfortable, which was itself a thing he had not had before, and which he was still learning to inhabit without waiting for it to be taken away. "Hyun-woo," she said, not looking up from her phone. "He left an hour ago. He said good night. He looked better tonight." "He is better," Min-jae said. Slowly. She nodded, went back to her phone, then set it down. She looked at the street. "Do you think about them, Pot?" she said. "The Whitfields?" He considered the question honestly. "Rarely. When I do, it's not what I expected. I thought I'd be angry for longer." "What happened to the anger?" He thought about this. "I think it went into the building," he said. "Into the construction. Month 1, month 2. I think a lot of what I was doing was converting it into something useful. By the time the doors opened, I didn't have much left." She looked at him. "That's healthy, actually." "I know. It surprises me." She smiled at that. The full one. It moved across her face in the way it always did, arriving as if it had not fully decided to come and then coming completely, and he had still not gotten used to it in 4 months, which he suspected was information about something. "Constance Whitfield," he said after a moment. "I heard they moved, the family, to Florida somewhere. Her husband's brother has a business there. Does that matter to you?" "No." He said it and checked it, and it was true. It matters only as information, the way the weather matters. Amani looked back at the street. A group of young people passed below, loud and easy with each other. The specific freedom of a Friday night in August when you were young enough to believe the night was long. She watched them pass. "I want to expand the intake capacity next quarter," she said. "We're already at near capacity, and the referral pipeline from the legal partners is growing faster than we projected. Send me the numbers." "Monday." "Good." They sat in the chairs, and the street continued its August evening below them, and the room around them was quiet now, nearly empty, the cleanup almost done. The August heat that had pressed against the city all day had finally, in the late hours, given up something. Not gone. The city was never cool in August, but softened, retreated slightly, the air coming through the open window carrying something that was almost relief. Min-jae sat in that air and breathed and felt, without analysis. Without the compulsion to examine and catalog, that was his most consistent quality, what the moment was. The foundation and his brother and the woman beside him in the city below, and the thing he had built from the specific wreckage of the thing he had built before. He felt it without naming it. He let it exist. After a while, Amani said, "Ready to go?" He stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He offered his hand and she took it, and they walked out of the warehouse into the Harlem night, which received them the way all nights receive people who have finally found the right place to be. Without ceremony, without comment, with the simple equality of darkness that falls on everything and asks nothing from anyone. The street was still moving. It would keep moving. That was the city's only promise and its only mercy, and tonight it was enough. He had stopped waiting for more than enough. That was the change. That was all of it. That was the whole long, hard distance between who he had been at 5 in the morning on the day of the wedding, lying in the dark counting minutes, and who he was now, walking in the August night beside someone who was here because she chose to be here, which was the only reason that had ever meant anything. Ahead of them, the street opened into an intersection where 4 directions met, each one lit differently, each one leading somewhere the other did not go. He did not pause to choose. He knew which way they were walking. They walked.